So I think we are okay to start. Maybe I can start with some conversation so that other people are arriving. I'll leave it for now. Okay, so does anyone remember what did we study last time? And I know Behram was looking at some development projects. So we need to, so one of you can talk about it if you like. Roja. Yeah, Nadia is there, co-host, so she should be able to. Roja, do you want to say something? Okay, we learned about IEs and EIAs. Thank you. So what we'll do is from now on, I will not look at the chat because I can see that it will drive me crazy. I'll just leave it for Nadia. And my screen is messing up, so I have to make sure that I take this stuff off. So all of you who want to see. For here, of course, and I hope you're able to hear me. So last time we spoke about IEs and EIAs, and I think it's one of the most important topics that everyone should know, specifically if they live in the cities, because there's always some development project taking place, and and for all of those, there has to be acceptances, permits, proper public hearing, inclusion of people who are around, and only then can the project be sustainable. So we need to make sure that the IEs and EIAs are done. But then I also shifted this class. So because we shifted EIAs early, now I have to shift all the law related back to here instead of end of the class. So we studied about the basic sciences. Now we look at some of the rules and regulations that make sure that whatever we learned is actually achieved in the societies that we live. And then eventually we'll look at the technologies that are available out there to make sure that pollution can be combated. And eventually we'll look at some of the monitoring. And then the last component now would be you guys taking action. So at the end of the course, I expect that instead of me just talking at you, I give you the opportunity to look up something that you liked in the course or learned, and focus on one issue that you liked in the class, or maybe outside of the class as well while you were taking this class, and then try and address it with whatever focus you have. So for example, I do not expect the management sciences students to do a hardcore scientific solution to the problem. They could totally do a project on, for example, behavior change, and how can an issue be resolved by making the public act. So things like this. So you have complete liberty on that. We can discuss it a little bit as well. And like I said, as a part of that environmental action, we'll also run a campaign on campus about single-use plastic in labs. So that's like the environmental action bit. Today, because then we studied IEs and EIAs, I thought it would be nice to just continue the discussion and look at the global law. So we did look at how EIA is in a way a global structure, but it's specific to the country. So every country, EIA is done by all countries, but every country has their own specific rules and regulations that the development agencies or a project has to comply to. For these other things, we call them multilateral environmental agreements, or if you have come across SDGs, they apply to the entire. I didn't do anything. So they apply to the whole globe, and we kind of have to make sure that the entire world is party to it. So there are a lot of terms that you need to know, and of course you don't need to know them in great details, but you will keep hearing things like we are party to the Convention on Climate Change, or we are a party to Kyoto Protocol. What it means is that when we went there in the UN discussion, we agreed or signed on whatever agreement it is. And similarly, we can just, those are yearly meetings that we take, but as we go through the project, we'll have a little more understanding. The reason why I like discussion on SDG partly is because every table that you go to globally now, one or the other way, there is a discussion on SDG, and there is a discussion on SDG because we obviously committed to certain goals and in order to achieve them in every country. That's like a common language that we speak now around the globe. So whenever world leadership sits, this is the common language that is evolved, or let's say the common commitments that are evolved. So it is that no matter where you go in the world, the discussion will be focused on the table on SDGs. And it's kind of related to the environmental sciences, because like I said, for me, environment is all the components. And we look at how this concept evolved from environment being just the natural environment to how now we also include social justice and economic justice into it, because that's what sustainable development is. So I hope people online are following us. So yeah, we'll look at that, we'll look at some important timelines. But before we start, I'm sure that you have heard, I don't know if you're able to hear Greta's speech, the net zero blah 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 speech. It was really funny, I think, how she mocked it, but that was a youth gathering for the COP26. Does anyone have any ideas? COP stands for Conference of Parties, and 26 refers to the 26th meeting. And it is in 2 weeks, and there's a lot of noise. If you've been following news, if you've been searching for things, you will see like COP26. So it's happening in Glasgow this year in November, and Italy and UK are hosting it together. But it is happening in Glasgow. Does anyone know? And if people who are online, you can type online. People who are here, if you want to talk about it, you can talk about it. No? Okay. So just like I said, countries that have signed a particular agreement, so in the United Nations, all the countries go, but then in the 1960s, around certain projects such as the nuclear waste, and the disasters, and the oil spills, and all the havoc that was caused, countries now want to do something about it. So around the 1960s, there was a lot of discussion on doing something together at a global scale. And that's how the first conference of the UN came into action, which is in 1972, but it was agreed upon in 1968. So in 1972, the United Nations Conference of Human Environment. So for the first time, it was established because of all the mismanagement that every human has the right to clean air, clean water. So that kind of narrative was established around this time. And then, it followed to a lot of other things. So if you look at the timeline, I personally think that this 1987 report, which is our common future, which was led by Franklin, and there was a commission called Franklin Commission, which was formed in the first conference. They then wrote a report, and that report coined these terms like sustainable development. And after that, I think another important meeting was the Rio Conference, which is where your United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change happened. So you must have seen a lot of UNFCCC, and I did see that someone has posted it on the Packet as well. That it is one of the important events, and it is because world leadership coming together to do something. And we'll talk about which particular documents came up. So these are conferences. This is one of the important outcomes, right? And similarly here, Kyoto was one of the important outcomes. But global leadership kept meeting again. And these parties, so for example, I was talking about IPCC's recent chapter on climate change, the IPCC's recent report on climate change. That report, a huge scientific committee has been formed, a lot of funds have been allocated, a lot of attention is now given to whatever is happening around the globe and in how we achieve this commitment. Right? Everyone wants a sustainable planet, but what are we doing towards it? So fast forward, in 2012, we had the Rio conference, but 2012 is also a landmark in the sense that whatever we promised in 1997 with the Kyoto Protocol, and I will talk about it later, this is where the first phase ended. So between 2008 and 2012, the first phase ended, and then the second phase ended very recently in 2020. So whatever the countries have committed, that they have to sort of prove through the NDCs that we determined to do this, and this is what we achieved. But then I think the most remarkable thing that's happened in the recent time is the Paris Agreement. And I am sure that some of you know what Paris Agreement is. It is G7. Okay, G7, that's like another hierarchy that I don't want to get into, because there's a lot of political side to this agreement as well. Because if one of the G7 countries doesn't agree, how do we pass the agreement? But yeah, you can.
Basically, they all came together and they had a plan to reduce their emissions to a very significant level. So I guess like that was a landmark for making all those major countries.
Absolutely. So all the world leadership came together and then they agreed to reducing the emissions. Yes, yeah. I'm sure there are. So basically what happens in this particular rule is all of it is voluntary. So for example, in the class, let's say this is the UN, I ask you guys to agree to living a plastic-free semester, right? And then all of you come and sign and become part of the agreement that we've had. But then some of you say, actually, it's impossible because I have to have, for example, a medicine that comes in a plastic bag, and suddenly you withdraw from it. Now, I can say that, or I'll not give you the CD marks because you committed to it and now you're withdrawing, but maybe that one point isn't going to change anything for you. So even if I had funds or grants or numbers that I was going to give you, maybe in the longer run, it doesn't matter to you. So on the one hand, you commit to doing something, but if you withdraw, so basically these developed countries have to put in some money as well, 100 billion rupees that would be used to help the global south grow as well. So I think the biggest criticism is that the developed world has 150 to 200 years of history of industrial growth. So they have gone through that process of development. They have improved their economy. And then now countries like us, they're saying that because of these agreements, let's not build the country, which means that don't vote for countries like ours where things are not clean. But we'll talk about these in now again, and then I keep referring to some of the documents because I think they are important. Just a minute. Okay. Zan has raised his hand. Yes, Zan.
My question is, Paris Agreement, it's not totally followed because they agreed to give like 100 billion floor amount to the developing countries, right? Rich countries were actually given to the developing countries, but they do not like us pe bhi pura nahi amal hua. And then again, there are hundreds of other instances jahan pe Paris Agreement ki khilafwarzi hui hai. So I don't think so. This agreement was like 100% successful, or we have to wait for its uski success ke liye.
Yeah, so again, like I was just telling Aruj, Trump didn't believe in climate change. So he withdrew from Paris Agreement. Did I say the name wrong? Okay, sorry. I do. Last year I had a panel who I kept calling my so bear with me on the names. But so I was telling Arish that you had a president who didn't believe in climate change, which means that he withdrew from it. He withdrew from it, so he was not legally bound to reduce the emissions. And we're going to be talking about what happened in 2050 very soon. So on the one hand, it is an exceptional agreement because almost the entire world came together to agree in achieving sustainable growth. Until 2030, they agreed to reducing all the anthropogenic GHG emissions as much as they could. And then on the other, some of them are just free to withdraw whenever they can. So it's not hard for legal binding, but what it does mean is that if there's any incentive in there for them in terms of money and projects, they will lose it. They will not have it. But for the developer, perhaps it's a good deal because they have to put in more money for the developing world. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but I hope that you're in. And I can see people sending messages that they're waiting in the waiting room. Please, can someone write or ask them to come back again and let them in? Okay, and ask the first question.
Ma'am, so in the context of the Paris Agreement, I was able to okay, how do you incentivize like bigger countries to take part in this? Because take the failure, obviously, it's voluntary, so anyone can opt out if they want to.
Yeah.
But another failure is that, like for example, अगर ना भी अपना part करो, you still mutually benefit from it. क्योंकि आप तो एक global scale पे mutual benefit करना चाह रहे हैं ना कि आप वो global emissions कम कर रहे हो. So countries can like not do their part and they can still benefit as much as like other countries. So how do you incentivize those major countries like the US to like contribute and do their part? Because वो जो projects से benefit आ रहे हैं वो तो I think उनके लिए बहुत minimum.
I think it's because UN is their face of political collectiveness, and whoever is not there, not acting enough, we're already thinking how much criticism does US have. उन्होंने बहुत कुछ try किया और बहुत सारे grants they just because they withdrew from the Paris Agreement. There was so much backlash and so much negativity. Or Joe Biden, he not only came back instantly, like that's the first thing that he did, but he also doubled the money that the US was going to chip in to achieve that $100 billion to do other development projects in the rest of the world, in helping others in reducing emissions. So jitna bhi grant tha, and we'll also talk about the disparity there as well. कि अब जैसे पाकिस्तान को फंड मिलता है on climate mitigation, and we're already releasing very little GHG. And a lot of this fund is for mitigation. What it means is कि हमें पैसे वो देते हैं कि आप CO2 emission कम करें. हम तो पहले ही बहुत कम कर रहे हैं. Right now, the criticism that, for example, a lot of Pakistani scientists have is give us more grants to adapt because हमने emit कम किया है, but हम disaster space कर रहे हैं. So a lot of those climate funds, जो green climate fund, या ये सारी चीजें, they're basically coming under this umbrella. A lot of that fund is mitigation fund. It's not adaptation fund. So they're asking us to release less instead of, a lot of this money is being invested towards that. Very bad thing is some countries would benefit more from it than other countries. Okay, and I can see there's some discussion in the chat, but I also have to send you to break out, so I'll make sure we move forward. Okay, so, but of course, UN is important, countries coming together is important, the discussion is important, but it doesn't mean that people weren't aware or weren't doing anything before, the countries came together on this agreement. And I was going to give you an example, but I'll quickly go to Kanya.
Ma'am?
Not very effective, but in theory, it's restriction actually extends to cover all countries. And that is also legal framework for countries to want to talk to countries and that we can find it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
मैम हमें कुछ भी समझ नहीं आ रहा, आवाज बहुत ज्यादा खराब है.
Oh no, that's too late. No, I'm just, so maybe I can just sit here and chill as well, just like you guys. अच्छा, तो आप लोगों को तो आवाज आ रही है ना? What if I just switch this thing off? So I think this is probably creating echo. ठीक है. This means I have to shout. Okay. If you guys don't hear me, you can then come here. Is this better?
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, it's better.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So yeah, with the chip, so what I wanted to say, okay, Hania was saying that we need to have an international, just like the International Court of Justice. I don't know. I mean, they haven't been able to, because it's sort of like a voluntary agreement to this. Now, just like I said, in the class, I can ask for a lot of initiatives. I can create an incentive, but if you don't want to do it, you don't want to do it. I mean, what can I possibly do? बस है environment ऐसे इस्तेमाल हाँ. So that's, I think for me, that's the biggest criticism that this will have, and should have as well. कि आप 10 साल सीन से गायब हैं, फिर आप आ रहे हैं और आप पैसे दे रहे हैं, and then you're making everything up again. Yes, Daniel, and then I need to move quickly.
वो एक डॉलर प्राइस नहीं, कार्बन प्राइस नहीं, तो हम मार्केट को गलत जगह ले आए। हमारा वैसे भी मार्केट ऐसी जगह पे अब देखते हैं हम जा रही है कि यहाँ पे उसको नहीं जाना चाहिए। यानी मनी शुड नॉट बाय दिस कार्बन एमिशंस।
Yeah.
तो ये असल
Exactly. So Daniel said what I've been saying, like how did, I keep asking, how do we decide on the money? कि एक तरफ काटोगे तो ये इतने पैसे देने पड़ेंगे। तो जब आप हर चीज को credits को only money, but then we have to create those kind of incentives. So we'll talk about Kyoto a little bit, because I think that will help you in understanding कि incentives किस तरह के create किए गए हैं, markets कैसी हैं, emission trade कैसे होती है. But I will try to stay here. Mark your CP whenever you raise your hand. So Chipko movement is well before, it happened around the time when the UN was happening, but uske pehle bhi bahut zyada indigenous activism hoti rahi hai. They before these countries coming together and agreeing, because before science evolving, there have been indigenous communities that have stood up and created movements that has created history. And for me, Chipko movement is one of them, where indigenous people with no knowledge, no education, hugged the trees and stopped industries from cutting them down, stopped the government from doing this. So uske baad, there were landmark laws that were established in India. So I like to give an example of this. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So Arij is saying that, I said it right. Arij is saying that the women took this movement, and that makes it this and a lot of other movements actually, hi Zan, a lot of movements are actually started by women, and I think that's the most incredible thing. And like I said, they're not very educated. They were just indigenous, जिनकी livelihood depend in forests, so that's an incentive for you without education, without anything else. But uske pehle, I'll quickly also talk about, because the smog season has just returned in Lahore, so I thought we'll welcome it again by looking at the history. So generally, you look at the history and you learn from it, but countries like Pakistan do not learn from it. They repeat the mistakes of the developed and industrialized world that were done in the 1800s and early 1900s. So 19th century में या even 13th century में भी जो चीजें हुई थी, जो developed world ने की थी, जो हमें समझ नहीं आई, हमें उनसे सीखना चाहिए था, but we didn't learn anything from them. So I don't know how many of you watch Crown, but I've heard that Crown has this season has talked about the London smog and how it lasted for a long time. But this term smog, which is smoke plus fog, was essentially coined by a Londoner in 1905. और इसकी वजह ये है कि the mist and the smog combined together to form this deadly combination which can kill people. But what was the instant solution? The instant solution eventually was, some bans at different times, but then eventually an act, and only through regulation. So the point that I want to make is eventually you have to have a regulation in place, and that regulation has to be followed clearly in order to achieve clean environment, which is why regulations are really, really important in order to achieve the science and implement the science. So let's quickly go back to the 1972 United Nations conference, which is also called Stockholm. So a lot of these conferences are referred to the places that they've taken place in. This one's called Stockholm Conference. We also read about Rio Conference where the UNFCCC took place. So what they did achieved from here is, of course, they coined the term sustainable development, but they also formed the Millennium Development Goals, which is called Agenda 21. Eight goals were created and those goals were achieved. I'm not sure, like at least in my lifetime, I've seen a lot of focus on maternal health, women education. All of that essentially came from these 8 goals. So, which is why, like, I like the fact that countries can come together, and this topic really became an important topic, and that has then contributed towards the well-being of the environment. So it's, while we criticize it, we also have to acknowledge that a lot of these achievements have been made possible. A lot of these discussions that were never a part of the table have become a part of mainstream discussion because of these goals that were set. MDGs were not achieved. So, they ended in 2015. A lot of it was not achieved. We overpromised, we underdelivered. But that should not stop us from overpromising, right? So again, like we came together in here in 2015 and then formed the SDGs, which will shortly come towards. So sustainable development is the development, and I know we've talked about it, that meets the needs of current generation without compromising on the, what is this thing? It's not going. Okay. Without compromising on the need of the future generations to meet their own.
That's the most of overly optimistic, and the countries are not actually legally bound to enforce them. So what will be the incentive for countries to meet these requirements?
I'll talk about the incentives in Kyoto. So I'll tell you what kind of mechanisms have been introduced, and one of them is money. So there's a lot of money in going.
Like if countries know that there is limited amount of research going on and how people improve their economy.
Yeah.
So I think that
Would be. And then also if, for example, I said there were a lot of nuclear waste. So the Minamata disease, which happened because of nuclear pollution in their water, or mercury in the water. And then it caused the kind of panic that it caused. People were born with deformities. There was a lot of, when you see that, I'm sure that if there is a sane leadership, they will say that we have to do something about it.
I'm always is it necessarily goals should be overly optimistic as well?
Yeah, so they are overly optimistic, and I'll talk about how overly optimistic they are. So just before we move on, I just have to make sure that we have enough time for the activity as well. Sustainable development essentially then means that it's not just the environment, right? We also have to give sustainable jobs to people. Those jobs have to be green jobs. And then we also have to include the community. Another relatively a little more complicated diagram that I like is, you have to use the natural resources with inclusion. So the natural resources should be used by local people, and it should ensure jobs and prosperity. So how all of these things interplay. And then, इस वक्त environment or environment से related projects में सबसे बड़ा मसला ये है कि people say they're expensive, they're capital intensive. So we have to make sure that there is some incentive for people to invest in it. So it would bring, first of all, people have to be aware that they need clean air for their future generations. If that is not an incentive enough, then we have to make sure that if there are renewable resources plants being brought, then jobs are given to the local people. Then maybe there's some subsidy on electricity. So we have to create those kind of incentives for people to say, this is it. We don't want to rely on other things. But the inclusion, the jobs, the prosperity, as well as the local environment and natural resource management is important. And without that, we cannot achieve sustainable development. But before we move on, I talked that there are a lot of conventions that keep taking place, and countries keep meeting all the time. They have formed some treaties. So conventions is when we just come to the class and sit and talk about things. A treaty is a relatively more, we sign on it, we become party, we agree to achieving something. So if in the convention we agreed to becoming a party to the Convention on Wetlands, that means that we have now committed to saving our wetlands. So whichever sites, and those sites are called in Pakistan Ramsar sites, have to be protected because we have agreed to. And then we will report yearly reports for all of these conventions that we have become a part of. And And no one's going to penalize us if we haven't achieved it, but they would encourage us and give us more incentives and more projects and more commitments if we are able to achieve it. So there is some incentive, and we'll look at how that's done. But a few others, and we'll talk about UNFCCC, but for example, Convention to Combat Desertification or Trade of Endangered Species. They're all some of the remarkable agreements that countries took place in order to save biodiversity, in order to save our environment. And the conference of parties, so for example, COP26 is for UNFCCC, whereas there's also going to be another COP in China sometime soon, which is the 16th meeting. And then that's called COP16 for this. So do not confuse like COPs for one with COPs for the other. The COP for UNFCCC is a little more famous because people know Paris Agreement and people are more concerned about the commitments that we've made because they're first global commitments. So let me focus a little bit on Kyoto. And I think because we're talking about the incentives, it's important to think how the incentives are given. So there are three mechanisms in the Kyoto through which countries can be incentivized, and one is called emission trading. So emission trading essentially is the fact that, so in the Kyoto, we agreed to, the Kyoto only applies to developing countries, right? We are not obligated. So Pakistan has signed Kyoto, but we're not obligated to do anything about it. Because of that 150, 200 years of history that the developed world has, they have to commit to reduce their emissions, I think by 5.2% compared to what their emissions was in 1990. And this has to be achieved every year just to make sure that they reach towards the net zero, that they're not emitting anything in the environment because they have already emitted or polluted the environment a lot. So that was like the first, and I think before this Paris Agreement, that was the most remarkable thing that was achieved. So although it was agreed upon in 1992 in the conference, it only came into force in 1997 because some countries didn't sign it. And some countries, again, are like US and China and India. So some of these key actors who were like big emitters did not sign it. And that's why, because of the G7 and that hierarchy, this didn't come into force until 1997. But what happens essentially in the emission trading is that those countries that are bound to reduce their emissions, if they have over emitted, so for example, if Canada is supposed to reduce 7% of its emission and it hasn't achieved it, then if Pakistan is under emitting, they can buy the credits from us. So there's now this market where if Canada is, or if the US is over emitting, so for example, if they were assigned 100 units or amount assigned units, then they were able to release 125 or 200, then they will have to buy those 100 credits from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, whichever countries had lower emissions or a lot of assigned amounts because there was no obligation. So they will buy it. So there's an incentive. If I under emit as Pakistan and then another country is over emitting, I can tell them that why don't you buy these credits from me because I did not emit them into the atmosphere. So that's the emission trading. So that's number one. The other is project-based. And I'm sure that you guys must have heard of clean development mechanism or joint implementation. So in that, essentially what happens is that you don't over emit and then just trade, but you actually put a project in a country. So the developed world or those Annex 1 countries will bring an industry, will bring a project into the developing world, which isn't obligated to commit to it. But then they will invest in it. Or SNE, like you just decide and talk to one another and it happens. There's a whole mechanism. So everything that I'm talking about is an executive body, there's a funding, there's an approval process, there are committees. So just ignoring all of that, that developed country decides to do a developing project in another country and then claims that it's reducing XYZ amount of emissions, and then that they can then claim that in the credits that they promised that they will reduce, right? And we get a cleaner development mechanism. And the second in that is joint implementation, in which developed countries can collaborate with each other as well. So the US and the Canada can collaborate too, and then claim credits. Like we're working together, but and again, we can negotiate about this, about how the developed countries would still develop cleaner. But those are essentially some of the things that I think we need to remember in terms of how, what kind of incentives there are for these countries. But these multilateral environmental agreements are, I think, still crucial, because if they weren't there, we wouldn't be speaking the same language, right? Every country will individually commit to something, but then what would be the accountability type? Where will they report? Because as we've seen, we're not very efficient in coming together and doing things. So just because we're able to come together and coin these terms and agree to doing something, I think it still is remarkable. The regulations can be enforced, but I think they are kept a little relaxed on purpose, partly because the decisions are made by those powerful countries, so they will never obligate themselves to do something, and partly because they don't want everyone to be afraid of the commitment, because otherwise countries like ours will never commit because they don't have the capability. And apologize for not taking the questions, but in the SDG then, in the Paris Agreement then, the countries came together in wanting to achieve 17 goals. And those 17 goals had 169 targets. Now, I've given you the notes, and it has all of those lists that each goal should be able to achieve in each country. Because, for example, we are a party to this, we will have to ensure that we try and achieve these development goals in Pakistan. So Pakistan will try and achieve all of this. This time, the agenda was called Agenda 2030, which meant that countries who've committed to this wanted to achieve almost all of it by 2030, and live sustainably. But just for you to have a quick look, we want to reduce poverty, hunger, increase good health, access to health, etc., quality education. Some of these are very relevant to our course, for example, clean water and sanitation. The others are as well, but it's only when you'll go into the indicators and see what they ensure. So, for example, I think educating people, giving people education about clean fuel, clean resources, cutting edge research also contributes. So for me, even 4 is as much related to environment as all the other goals are. And similarly, gender equality, this is again quite mainstream across. So affordable clean energy, we've been talking about how expensive it is. It should be made affordable for us. So just look at how these goals are actually, I feel like they're an important component of environmental sciences, because if all of them are ensured, automatically we'll have a sustainable planet as well. And then some of the others, for example, again, life below water, responsible consumption, we've been talking about natural capital degradation, climate action for us to come together and make sure that climate change is mitigated, communities are able to live, life on land, sustainable communities, sustainable cities, because as we've seen, cities are contributing to pollution the most. Hi, Hawk. So I think people are just coming here. And then again, like promoting peace, coming together, partnerships are most important, because Kyoto was able to achieve something because countries came together and partnered with each other. So these, all of these are really important. Okay, so I can take a few questions quickly in the next 5 minutes, and I can take it from people online as well. And then I'll send you to breakout rooms, and then you can talk about these particular case studies. What you have to do is look at all the goals and the case study and see which the case study relates to which goals or indicators. Otherwise, I thought you would never go and read all of those goals. So it would be a nice way for you to interact or engage with the goals in the class. Okay, so I like some of these. No, I don't like it. I dislike some of these case studies, just say Bhopal disaster or thalidomide. But then we also thought that you're Gen Z and you like to talk about people. So we've also put, on Rafa's recommendation, I put Elon there as well. So is Elon sustainable? Are his initiatives sustainable? Does he relate to any of the goals? So maybe you can, one group can look at that as well. But yeah, so I'll take one question online first, and then I'll go to Asad. Yes, Bakhtavar.
मिस अगर यूएसए इतनी डेवलप्ड कंट्री है और ज़्यादा मतलब जैसे उनके पास सारे इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन वगैरह, तो जब उन्होंने बैकअप कर लिया था तो फिर बाकी कंट्रीज क्यों उसमें रहीं और डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज भी डीमोटिवेट हो जानी चाहिए थी, तो ये एग्रीमेंट क्यों अभी तक चल रहा था?
हाँ, because the other countries still were there. So although out of the G7, one country had backed out, the other countries were still there, and all the other parties वो mechanism काफी अच्छा established हुआ है. So this was, like I said, there was a lot of backlash on the US. But I think the fact that it still kept on going in other countries is good. I'm happy that it didn't collapse, and it should not have collapsed by one party coming up or not. कुछ चीजें उन्होंने कुछ चीजों से ज़ाहिर निकाल दिया था US को. So they did have but again, like powerful countries probably care very little about what happens in the overall process, because they can afford to be sanctioned in one or two things. It doesn't really matter to them. But because we were only 11 people in the class, so you guys can take one case study, and because you're here, I give you the liberty to choose one of the case studies. Do you want to choose Elon Musk? There you go. Now I know why Rafa put it there. Okay. So the class that is here is going to look at Elon Musk, and in your LMS, I've already put in the lectures notes, the case study as well. But I'll also share it here. I'll share the link here as well. For the rest of you, I'm going to divide you into breakout rooms, but let me look at the numbers. So you're 30. So maybe 3 groups should be okay. And then group 1 can take, you should definitely take Bhopal disaster. One group should definitely take thalidomide, and then the breakout room 3 can take Greta. So we'll have 2 chemical related projects, and we'll have 2 people related projects, right? So we'll divide you in groups of 3. And then you'll room 1 will do thalidomide, room 2 will do Bhopal disaster, and room 3 will do Greta. Is that okay with you guys? No answers. Are people's cameras on, by the way? आप सब एक ही ग्रुप में हैं, हाँ. There's no point in it. थोड़ा सा आ जाइए, आपस में बात कर लीजिए. I'm sure that we are all Muslim brethren. Okay, let me go to the rooms as well and see what they're doing. There's 7 people in the room. Who are these 7 people? Are you guys not able to join your rooms, breakout rooms? Those of you who are still here. How was she? You're reading it separately? You've read it. Awesome.
Thank you.
Include everybody. उसके बाद you guys discuss के उसके answers. पहले I post.
यार यही है कि हमें देख लेना है कौन कौन से जो हैं यार SDGs फॉलो हो रहे हैं, कौन कौन से नहीं हो रहे, और जो फॉलो हो रहे हैं वो सस्टेनेबिलिटी में कितना रोल प्ले कर रहे हैं।
क्वेश्चन नंबर 1 आंसर करते हैं ना सबसे पहले।
चले जाओ वापस उस पेज पे।
हाँ,
चलो
of the repercussions of the accident. So we have to tell something about those that are being neglected as well. पीछे करना एक मिनट पापा।
क्या आई गेस नंबर 12 भी हो रहा है रिस्पॉन्सिबल कंजम्पशन।
हाँ हाँ हाँ
So basically, we should start our discussion, right?
She was.
हाँ तो सबको केस स्टडी समझ आ गई होगी ना और वीडियो देखने सब
मैं वीडियो में like 1 मिनट पे पहुंचा
अच्छा हाँ वो वीडियो वीडियो काफी डिटेल्ड है तो उसमें अच्छे से समझ आ जाएगा लाइक
अच्छा
केस स्टडी हाँ इतनी नहीं लेकिन वीडियो में काफी डिटेल से अच्छे से विजुअलाइज किया हुआ So,
चलो then like
as long as
I'll finish off the
that-
video and then we'll continue.
ठीक
So,
सब
सब लोग भी देख लें
do let me know when you guys are finished.
Yeah.
So no, some of the people are watching the video and we will start in a while. Okay, perfect.
Hi, Bhakta, which room were you in? I have to assign you again, I think. Bhakta, आप कौन से रूम में थी?
मिस 1 में
I'll assign you.
Yes. So ये पूरी story है. बाकी if Zainab you want to add something.
Yeah, so I was just saying, like, so if you look at it from the SDGs वाला point of view, so you see कि like जो basic वाली भी है, like if you see कि end poverty and like achieve food security or support, so like no kind of like even the people who were affected by the disaster, they were given no kind of compensation, and even if they go to the hospitals, like उनके proper records भी नहीं है कि कितने लोग affect हुए थे और कितनों को medical need मतलब medical assistance की जरूरत थी. So it's
Right.
Do we have to write a report?
I'm not sure. Do we, Dr. Fozia, do we have to write a report?
No, you don't need to, Sabah. You just need to discuss it and then probably summarize it when you come back in the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
guys, आखिरी question discuss कर लेते हैं.
And में summarize किसने करना है?
Make them at par with other countries as well. So I think it's important in the sense that you should ensure equity. So of course, not everyone is going to be at the same level. So for that matter, it's definitely something that you should address, and they should be more individualized and should accommodate more countries.
Justice people. So can you also say that? Technically.
Yeah, I think we can, because I feel like sorry, I interrupted you.
No,
कि
no.
जो है, because like our basic needs are not being met, right? So there is no proper food, there is no proper water, so there is no education, there are no proper institutions either. So I feel like कि just start की ही 2-3 necessary goals होते हैं, अगर वही meet नहीं होते तो फिर बाद की भी चीजें, that's like a idealistic वो ही कि अच्छा education मिल जाएगी लेकिन साफ पानी नहीं होगा.
So I guess we can write that it was working towards like developing pesticides which were supposed to help out in terms of like the no hunger problem. like and uske alawa I think uske alawa we can't really write much about it because like downsides itni thi because of the leak ke, you just mainly focus on those.
Also, like ये भी है कि this industry was built very near to like residential areas, so like people were living directly close to it. But normally ऐसा नहीं होता because yeah, sure. So we can add that point too. But like the third part है कि ये कि I feel like it meets the basic requirements जो होती हैं एक society की progress करने की कि equal rights and like you know
हाँ इंडस्ट्रीज ने अपने रूल्स बनाए हुए और ये शुरू में ना the right to information because people were very innovative with what they were doing allow नहीं होता था फ्लोर पे कैमरा या क्योंकि लोग स्टील करते थे इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रॉपर्टी तो अगर उन्होंने बहुत ज़्यादा इन्वेस्ट किए पैसे to develop a technology no one was allowed to take pictures पर अब उसको अगर आप sustainability और environment के लिहाज से देखें तो we should have access to information we should have access to details और उस लॉ को जो कि अदरवाइज इनोवेशन और आईपी के अंडर बनाया गया था इन एनवायरमेंटल एंड सस्टेनेबिलिटी यूज हो रहा है ओके वेलकम बैक टू एवरीवन who's come back. I don't know how can I engage all of you together. Which program is this? Yes. You should have applied for it. So now you know about the school, which is super exclusive. That's when you know. Okay, because I've given a lot of time to you guys, maybe I'll give the floor to the Zoom people first. So which group? Yeah, I can be politically very, very incorrect, but I have nothing to fear. Okay, which group wants to go first? The Elon Musk group thinks that Greta's group should go first, but I think we should have a more serious discussion before fun. Zainab, do you want to go?
Yeah, so we discussed the Bhopal disaster. So just looking at the basics of it, there was like a chemical leak from the pesticides factory. And even after several years, it happened in 1980s. But even after several years, people are still suffering from like birth defects and other health issues. So looking at it from like an SDGs kind of point of view, it does not fulfill the basic requirements, like the basic goals of ending poverty, because the people who were the affectees were not compensated in any way. The people who were like living close and had to suffer directly from the chemical leak were not like given any kind of compensation for everything that they had to suffer from. And other than that, the water sources are still contaminated, which means the clean water is, or everything with sanitation wala goal tha, that's also completely neglected. Other than that, because considering there is no proper water key source, they can't do agriculture, they don't have access to like proper food, proper or clean food, right? That also directly correlates with the other more developed goals, which are of education and like industries, right? So if your basic needs are not being met, the other developed goals are just like completely unattainable. So I think that was about it. I don't feel like even after a very long time, there was no proper cleanup or anything, right? So it meant people still have to suffer. The goals are completely being neglected. The society is still stuck at that point. There has been no progression. So
Thank you, Zainab. We can take the next group after, and maybe you can have an open discussion afterwards. So the next group, which is 2. Okay, you can. No, come on, room 2. Or was it room 2? It was room 2. Okay, room 1 now, which is the thalidomide people. There was one room that was super quiet. Every time I went in, people were just quiet. So I don't know what was happening there. They're giving you the secret. Do you guys want to do Elon first?
Yes.
You want to do Elon first. Maybe I can bring the mic close to you guys. So go ahead.
So basically what we discussed was, so basically what we discussed was how Tesla is using their green efficiency label and manipulating it into like compromising on those sustainable goals. And like they have created a gigafactory which is violating all these like like sustainable goals 6, 7, 12, 13, 15, 10. So I think like Elon Musk is like using this to his advantage. He's also investing in cryptocurrency, which is like very much energy intensive. So yeah, I think he needs to be.
Does anyone else want to add?
We had some recommendations.
Also, we had recommendations like there needs to be more sustainable industrialization near residential areas, and we need to have green sources for crypto mining.
Crypto mining, of course.
Yes.
Okay, so the other groups need to now wake up and tell us about their case study. Otherwise, you won't be able to go back to bed if you're not already on bed. Okay, maybe the group, Suba, which group were you guys in?
Group 1.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so we had a case study on the medicines that could prevent morning sickness, and they became very popular because of how readily they were available. However, much scientific research was not carried out on them, which is why they led to significant birth defects. And the main defect was that certain portions of the body would not grow. So, for example, a bone from the lower hand would not grow, but the bone from the upper arm would grow, which would lead to a very stunted growth. as a result of which, of course, there were several burst effects all over the United States as well, but in Germany too. So there was this person, and if this was FDA approved, so another doctor was when she was appointed as the chairman of the FDA, she started more research into it and discovered that, this medicine or this drug is not very appropriate for use. And the sad part was that it took around 50 years for the for the people who produced this drug to apologize for this. And the main goal that we believe that it violated would be the goal number 3 and goal 18. So the third goal says that it is impertinent to ensure healthy lives and more well-being for all at all ages, which was a goal that was violated. And then goal number 18 says that there should be a focus on promoting peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development and provide access to justice for all and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. So it violates the SDG because there was no accountability in the beginning. Something like this, when it is reintroduced into, for example, firstly introduced into society, should undergo significant research. You can't just introduce something, especially for pregnant women, without really considering the side effects or the repercussions. So it did lead to significant birth defects, and accountability was quite questionable as well, because they only paid a certain amount of money to cover those costs, and you can't really quantify the defects that the children have in terms of money. You can't just provide them monetary compensation and say that it's all right now. So yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And even most of the research on vaccine and a lot of other stuff, it says it always leaves women of color and people of color and women in general from the research. So thank you, Subha. And then the last group now, please. Greta, Queen Greta.
Yes, it was group 3, was our group. We got Greta. So a basic overview is that she is one of the youngest environmentalists, and initially she started her work by focusing it on herself. So she turned vegan and she stopped the air travel, and she's tried to kind of incorporate sustainable lifestyle in her own life first. And then later on, she started this protest where outside the Swedish parliament, which was like that her demand was that to pressure the government to meet the carbon emission targets, right? And then later on, she stood up against the construction of the UK's first deep coal mine. So she wanted people to understand the urgency of the situation and how harmful this construction would be for the environment. So mostly the sustainable development goals she stood up for was climate action and sustainable cities and communities as well, because when you are focusing on the climate or the environmental, so automatically you kind of aim for sustainable cities and communities as well. And thirdly, what our group decided was that perhaps responsible consumption as well, because her lifestyle, and since she became a role model herself, so her lifestyle also became a role model for people. So yes. What could possibly be undermined due to this was perhaps industry innovation and infrastructure, because people would be hesitant to make something from fossil fuels or something along those lines, because they need to the possible innovations through fossil fuels might be undermined. And secondly, good jobs and economic growth, which were owing to the deep coal mine, which was to be constructed. So the jobs and employment opportunities which were associated with it won't be possible if that doesn't under. Next was that what possible goals which are not still a part of the sustainable development goals, and one of our group members sent this report, which said that clean air, it's a very general goal, and it kind of becomes part of most of the goals like climate change or further, but it requires its own goal there, a separate one for clean air. So that was the discussion.
You're on mute is my standard line. Okay, so thank you so much for this. I know we are over time, so I'll let you go, but thank you for taking part in the activity. There are a few points that I wanted to make, but we're already exceeding the time, so I'll let you guys go. In the next class, there'll not be a Padlet, and you'll have your quiz, and we'll just revise. So come prepared, and then see you guys in the next class. And then maybe you can clap for yourselves, because Asad has been wanting to. So thank you. Thank you for taking part in the activity. Full CP for everyone? Only those who come. Okay. Okay. Thank you guys. Have a good day. Yeah, yeah. Do you guys have any issue with the format? Do you want?
Okay. If you will in the